Well, good afternoon, everyone, and sorry to interrupt the Don McLean sing-along, but all good things come to an end, and all good things begin too. And welcome to our very first Creative Sensemaker Live. And my name is Matt Dancona. I'm an editor at Tortoise, and it's a real pleasure to be hosting this very special event with some very special people, and to see you all here. Now, as I hope many of you know, Creative Sensemaker was a sort of weekly emergency newsletter we started at Tortoise early in the pandemic to steer people towards great culture in what was obviously going to be a difficult and strange time, but also as a call to action to alert them to ways that they could support the creative industries, which it was clear from the start were going to take a hit, not perhaps to the extent that has actually been the case. An 8 months on, Creative Sensemaker has really become a fixture of our week, and we always look forward to hearing your recommendations. But so too sadly has the plight of the arts and culture world and live music, which we're talking about today, which is struggling and facing press challenges in the second lockdown. So I want today to look at that question, to look at live music, which is one of the jewels of the in the crown of Britain's creative sector, and I personally would say one of Britain full stop's jewels in the crown, and the economy, and it's for the fabric of society. And I also want to, obviously, as we look at the problems, to try and tease out from our speakers and from you, as far as possible, a way forward, because it is so important. I think it is so important that this rather magical inheritance and diverse and extraordinary powerhouse we have in this country is preserved through this what's going to be a very difficult and go on being a very difficult time for some time to come. So let me just kick off with some obvious housekeeping points with which you're probably now woefully familiar, as we've lived in the Zoom world for far too long. Do join in the chat, which is being overseen by my brilliant colleague Ella Hill. If you want to speak, want to say something, signal that in there, or more traditionally, if you want to do so, click on the participants key and press raise hand, and that will put the blue hand up, and I will be able to come to you. And we want to involve as many people as we can. Before I get to the speakers, a couple just a sort of snap polls to get us in the mood. I don't know if we can get the first poll up, if that's possible. So the question is, do you agree with Grayson Perry, who rather provocatively said that the pandemic would clear a bit of deadwood in the creative industries? So do you agree with that sentiment? So fire away. Click on yes or no or not sure, depending on whether you think that's a sensible idea. Well, quite a few more thinking it's sensible than I would have expected. 26%, not sure 20%, but a majority don't agree with it. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is more specific to today's specific subject. So we have the second poll up, please. Do you expect to be able to go to a live music event before Easter 2021? So click away. And then we have a result. No, so clear no there, 70%. Yes, coming in at 23, and not sure 7%. Okay, so we've got a sort of a sense of the temperature of the room. So with that, I want to dive straight in by getting to some thoughts and ideas from our really terrific speakers. And I want to start with Nitin Sawhney, who I'm not going to even try and disguise my admiration for Nitin. I think he's one of the the really great musicians around today. I think, he's an Ivor Novello winner. More importantly, some of his catalogue, I mean, particularly, I think the album Beyond Skin is one of the great albums of the last 50 years. And as I was saying to him before we started, I'm excited about his new album, Immigrants. Someone who really represents the best of creative and imaginative music, and is a superb performer. But obviously can't perform at the moment. So, Nitin, we know you've been planning a tour around the new album for some time. So can you give us a sense of what your experience and frustrations have been around the pandemic? And I guess as well, as someone who's, famously collaborative as a musician, you bring in people, you bring in different strands and traditions of music, what impact it's had on the many people that you work with?
Well, there's a lot in that, in those few questions actually that you just asked. First of all, well, thanks for having me today. But just to say, a lot of the musicians I know have been really struggling because there's been no clear guidelines as to how to continue with a lot of the work they're doing. I mean, it's very difficult because obviously a lot of people can't be touring or can't be performing. For me, I found that it was useful to learn to have how to use Final Cut Pro. So I actually was recording with other artists, getting them to record in their own rooms. And I mean, this is my house. My studio's in Brixton, but I moved a lot of stuff here so I could continue to work this way. And during lockdown, I put together some work for charity like the PRS Foundation and PRS for Music, helping other musicians, but also the Royal Albert at Home series as well. So we tried to keep up some kind of performance, albeit not live in a concert hall. And I think also, I've been trying to focus on making my next album that you mentioned earlier, and thanks for your kind words. And it's been interesting because, like you said, I collaborate a lot. So during the course of making the album, it's been about trying to find different ways to collaborate with people. I mean, for example, and given that it is called Immigrants, there's a lot of people who are in different parts of the world who've actually performed with me. So in some ways, using Zoom or using other ways to collaborate has been actually, I guess, the only way to do things. And I'm used to traveling a great deal. So yeah, it's been a whole change of mindset and a different approach to how you keep your output going. And also as a film composer, I've been working a lot here, but a lot of films have ceased production because actors couldn't perform together. So it's just a very weird time. But everyone knows that.
And in terms of sort of just the general isolation, I mean, there are those, I've heard some writers saying that they find the isolation is quite helpful. But the vast majority of people who are creative by temperament that I've spoken to say actually what they really miss is the contact and, for want of a better word, jamming with other people, either literally or metaphorically. And that part of creativity is that constant interaction between your colleagues, your friends, the places where you get your ideas and your inspiration. And, creatives shouldn't really be stuck in a room.
Yeah, it is difficult because, I mean, obviously, it's a very different experience when you're performing on your own to actually bouncing ideas off other people in a room. And I've done that to some degree, to the limited extent that I could. I did do that, but it's a weird, different type of kind of creativity that comes about through isolation. You find yourself getting into a more reflective headspace, but at the same time, it's much more difficult to realize that in ways that you're used to. So I guess I'm not saying that it's been constantly frustrating because I've found ways of getting around things, but it has been very difficult. As you rightly say, I'm somebody who's very used to interaction with other artists, and that's not just other musicians. I mean, I work a lot with dancers, I work a lot with actors, directors, all kinds of people. So it's been tricky on lots of levels.
And do you, I mean, when you look to the future, what do you think the priority now should be in order to, as it were, get a roadmap out of all this? I mean, do you look into the next 6 months in a spirit of optimism or not?
I look at the next 6 months with a spirit of curiosity more than anything, because, for example, there's the idea of hybrid gigs. I mean, recently we saw, you know, the Barbican have been doing online gigs. I mean, you know, obviously even with theatre, you had the Old Vic actually putting on a performance of, I think it was called Lungs, and you've got this kind of whole idea of trying to find hybridized ways of putting on live performance so that you can have some degree of online ticketing, as well as a limited number of people in the concert hall or in the room itself. So I think it's moving that direction at the moment. Probably by the time we sort all this out, maybe there might be another solution. I mean, who knows? But I think for now it's really about keeping people safe. I think it is important to make sure that's a priority, but at the same time, it's also about finding ways to allow creativity to flourish, because I think people need music. They need art. They need theatre. They need dance. You know, all these things I think have never been more important, and so it's important to really get that balance right. And I think hybrid gigs for now might be the way forward.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Emma, you are Emma Banks, co-head of CAA in London, but you know, much more than that. I mean, a real legend in the world of music, and I enjoyed seeing you get an award. You know, I think it was about 1.5 years ago, and the love in the room for you from bands and colleagues was amazing. And you've represented some of the, you know, the world's greatest acts, Katy Perry and Red Hot Chili Peppers and Florence and the Machine, to mention only a few. And so I guess we turn to you as someone who has oversight of the whole industry, and so I guess the first thing I'd like to ask Emma is what's the government done? How do you audit it in its response to the plight of the creative industries, and what should it have done?
Hard to say, isn't it? I think because this is, and hopefully is, a once in a lifetime event, and nobody had any experience of it, and it would appear nobody had thought it would ever happen, even though you can now find so much footage of God knows who saying this is going to happen. No one paid any attention. And I suppose, understandably, we were pretty much bottom of the queue. I mean, it feels to me like the DCMS is, you know, the ugly stepsister of the rest of the government anyway, in the amount of priority a lot of the time that everybody there gets given. I think, you know, when they eventually put the Culture Fund together, that was clearly a good moment. You know, we can't deny that that wasn't a lot of money. I question whether it's still going to the right people. Obviously, there's still a lot of money that hasn't actually even been allocated. And my understanding is that particularly the very high value loans haven't really been picked up on. And so the Arts Council are now trying to figure out what they're going to do with that money. You know, in my specialism is obviously, you know, sort of rock, pop, contemporary music. And in those cases, when you give money to venues, basically, you are just doing that. You're giving money to a venue. If the money goes to the Roundhouse, then a musician like Nitin isn't getting any of it because they don't have a company there. It literally just keeps the Roundhouse going. And I use that just as a name. It's not meant to be a comment on any of on that venue. So I think that's been incredibly difficult to really see where money's going. You know, thank God, in a bizarre way, I don't think that this second sort of lockdown, because I live in Clapham and there's a hell of a lot of people still out there. It's not like the first one, that's for sure. I don't think this is going to impact on our industry particularly. It actually may have done some good because it's extended the furlough scheme and improved the self-employed money for people. And if that's through to March, I think that is almost more important than anything, because certainly, you know, I think businesses like mine have looked and gone, how do you keep paying people when there is zero money? You know, because the money, when everyone looks at those numbers from Chris Carey's Cliff Edge report, which of course was before this furlough announcement, which will make a difference to the amount of people that are going to lose their jobs. It's, I've forgotten what I'm trying to say now. I've lost the plot totally. Yeah, ignore me.
No, you know, the question about furlough money and self-employed money, and I guess the follow-up question is the self-employed money enough to keep people ticking over until they can start, you know, doing full-time or at least, you know, sufficient time work to keep the wolf from the door? And you know, what does that tell you about what? Secondly, does the fact that it's going through till March tell you about the government's broader plans? Because it suggests to me that they're bracing for possibly a third lockdown.
Well, I think that between now and the end of the winter, we're probably going to be in and out, because you know, what are the lockdowns doing? They're just trying to keep the amount of people in hospital at a level that is bearable, and that's going to come and go. As soon as people go and communicate again, they're going to go, those numbers are going to go up. You know, the furlough and the self-employed has to be a good thing. It will keep some businesses going that wouldn't be able to afford to keep paying staff, will keep some self-employed people going. As we know, there's a huge amount of people that are falling through the cracks, musicians, you know, one-person management companies where they can't furlough themselves because then they have no business at all. Yep. So it hasn't solved every problem, and it's a huge worry. I was talking to somebody earlier today. You know, the good news is we can still go ahead with live streams through this furlough. They're able to go ahead with, you know, TV programs with suitable social distancing. And you talk to any crew guy that's got the glimmer of hope that there's a live stream in 2 weeks' time. Honestly, it's not of course money's important, but it's also about people's self-worth and having something to do. And because everyone is so highly skilled and highly trained, it's shocking how, I think as well, people are only looking at musicians, which is clearly important, or, you know, actors, and it's all the other people in that ecosystem, down to the guys that are, you know, packing the trucks between shows. You know, if you've tried to play Tetris, you know, that's Tetris in a truck. It's flicking difficult, and you've got to do it in an hour because otherwise you miss your load in for the next day. I mean,
you say that, you know, music is, and I suppose creativity generally is the poor relation. And I wonder if it should be, you know, because I remember seeing the other day that the UK, which is, you know, it's a crude statistic, but it does tell you something, which is that the UK has 1% of the world's population, but generates 9% of its music revenue. And, you know, a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of political will is expended on the hospitality sector, you know, fine. But you get the sense that the cultural sector has to sort of perform a little dance in order to justify what is actually, you know, a serious commercial business and very much part of the British economy. I mean, quite apart from its, you know, its value, its intrinsic value, which I stand by to the death, but, you know, actually it shouldn't be the poor relation.
No, it absolutely shouldn't be. I mean, what's everybody looked to during this lockdown time? Yeah. They've looked to music, they've looked to film, they've looked to the arts. All of that is so important. And I think one of the problems, and particularly in the contemporary sector, has been that because we have never asked for anything before, we've never been to government, we've always made a profit. You know,
Yeah.
it's been one of the few sectors of the economy that's actually increasing. It really is. And so, you know, it's been hard for, I think, certain parts of the business to even know how to approach Arts Council funding. Even though there's been webinars and explanations, it's still tricky. And, you know, there doesn't seem to be any question that the government can subsidize whatever it is, whether it's fossil fuels or farming or aviation. And we've been through the whole list way before the pandemic, but we've never asked for anything. And now we get what is a really relatively small amount of money, given the size of our industry and the money that it's made for the British economy, you know, aside from the good it does mentally, physically, you know, philosophically to us all. It's, you know, sometimes it's just so depressing to think that we're not, you know, we get the conversation after Premier League football, we get the conversation after, you know, all of those things. And maybe, you know, look, we're getting there, but yeah, we shouldn't be the poor relation.
Absolutely. Stuart Murphy, you are Chief Executive Officer of the English National Opera, and also it's your birthday, so we wish you a very, very happy birthday from Tortoise and everyone here. It's wonderful to be able to spend part of it with you.
I was looking forward to this whole birthday.
Well, I mean, you know, what more could a person ask, really? What I mean, you know, you've also been involved in you know, Sky, and you helped with the launch of Sky Atlantic and all sorts of extraordinary endeavors. And I guess you know, wearing both your, you know, your hat at ENO, you know, you've done some really innovative things during lockdown with the drive-ins and things like that. What do you think can be done between now and whatever this is ends, in order to get us? How do you build a bridge between here and what would be, you know, a recognizable service at the Colosseum? I mean, what does that bridge look like?
I mean, so it's so interesting hearing the other guys talk. I think so. I think the first thing is, for us, it was shifting the company, so it didn't think it was a discrete moment that was going to end. It was a moment that we were going to have to learn to live with. And certainly behind the scenes, when we talk to government, whether that's the health department or the Treasury or the DCMS, Dad said, actually, there'll be an outbreak, a third, fourth, and fifth wave. So we're in a different world now. And a sort of thing, a mantra I'd used when I got to ENO, which was very different to my time at Sky and the BBC, was good companies embrace continual, gentle change. So, you know, the rate of cultural change is faster than our ability to understand it. So a strategy of lots of companies is get comfortable with continual, gentle change, whether that's how you organizationally structure yourself or just adapting to what audiences' tastes and needs are. And so there's no, you know, I think you need to do that pre-COVID anyway, but COVID has sort of taught us that we need to keep adapting all the time. I think, so that's one big thing. I think a second big thing, just on a specific point, you know, I suspect the lockdown will continue to mid-December, and then they'll lift it so people can do a bit of Christmas shopping and see families for Christmas, and then I suspect there'll be another lockdown till sort of mid-January. So for us, we're in the opera world, we're thinking rehearse in February, stage some stuff in March, and then we have musicals in the Colosseum in summer anyway. So that's sort of our plan. We're assuming no social distancing from the summer, but our business plan is predicated on 1 meter social distancing until then. So then the question is, where does that leave us? Well, one thing it means is, as a company, we've had to sort of reignite our raison d'etre. And, you know, we're there first and foremost for audiences, secondly to serve the music, and we're in the emotion game and the imagination game. And so we need to take that responsibility seriously. And actually, if again, it's a bit similar to like when I was in TV, if the nation is going through trauma, which it obviously is, there's, you know, two big binary responses. One is you reflect the trauma, another is you help people escape the trauma. In the same way that, you know, big movies do in the cinema. And so so we regrouped and said, actually, what does our really important role look like? So let's get people away from this shit, frankly. So we did a big drive-in opera at Ali Pali. We're doing Mozart's Requiem, recording it tonight and tomorrow. That'll be on BBC Two in a fortnight. And at least try and stage something. Don't just mothball, which is the worst of all situations. I think the future, it looks really, really different. I think opera plans 3 years ahead, and drama on TV and movies plan several years ahead. I think this period of sort of tap on, tap off pushes one towards artistic ideas that are pop-upable and then you can bring down again. That's a fucking nightmare for opera. So, we're looking what we can put on stage that is very quick to rehearse and very quick to build a set for and very quick to do costumes for, and then quickly pull down if things go pear-shaped. And that's really not what opera's about. It tends to be epic sets and epic scenes and 3 years in the making. So we've had to think differently about what great artistic looks like. Also, we've had to rethink what our role as a convening genre looks like, because a massive part of this, whether you go to see AC/DC or to see Hamilton, is the convening power of opera and just being in a room with convening power of art and music and just being in a room with other people. It's just not the same being on Zoom. And so much of your love of a moment is witnessing the love in other people's eyes. I mean, Jeff Lloyd at Virgin once at Virgin Radio used to say when he goes to a concert, he doesn't look at the performer, sorry Nitin, but he turns and looks at the audience. And there's such joy in being part of the collective experience. So, it's tough to realize how you replicate that in a world that's digitally dominated. I mean, is it that you do spaced out stuff in big parks? Is it that drive-in live works? Is it that drive-ins work a lot more? God, I don't know. But actually, we should just keep guessing and trying stuff. And I think audiences are so desperate for work, as Emma says, that they'll forgive us if we get things wrong. So try and fail and try again, I guess.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure that's right about the iterative approach. Thanks, Stuart. Can I come to Ella, who I think has got some slides there to present to us? Ella.
Yes, I think they'll be coming in just a second. So this first slide is from a report that came out earlier this month, and it shows that on average across the sector, it's projected that the live music business will lose 80% of its revenues this year as venues closed and gigs and tours were cancelled. And Martin Ricks in the chat has mentioned that it's not just about artists and the tech side of, not just about artists, but it's also about the tech side of the business. And that has been really hard hit. So you can see here that that's almost closer to 90% of revenues that they'll be losing. Festivals as well are closer to that 90% mark too. And if we can go to the next slide. The arts and entertainment sector has consistently had the highest percentage of its workforce on furlough. In the spring, it was close to 70% of eligible workers that were placed on furlough in the arts compared to other sectors, who were about 23%. And if we remember that furlough was designed to prevent redundancies, things aren't looking good. But it's also something that we've mentioned already, I think, is that the furlough stats don't tell you the whole picture. 80% of people in live music are self-employed. And I think one of my colleagues, Emily, mentioned in the chat that quite a few people are falling through the gaps of that self-employed support. And so their jobs, their work is at risk. A report published earlier this month estimated that 170,000 people, that's about 64% of the workforce, are expected to lose their jobs by the end of the year, including about 70% of self-employed people. Live music contributes 1.1 billion to the UK economy, and as Matt said earlier, the industry punches well above its weight globally, and it adds several billions more in added value to the rest of the economy when people are spending money on food, travel, accommodation, and so on when they're attending music events. So it has a really big impact. But the concern here is not just about jobs and money, it's also about culture and people's participation in it. The UK is a nation of music lovers. Millions of us attended concerts and festivals as well. And so the potential that we'll lose some of those events or some of those venues is, going to affect that in a big way. Looking at the Culture Recovery Fund, they released some data on the grant funding so far earlier this month, or last month as well. And the total is 1.57 billion of Culture Recovery Fund. 880 million of that is grant funding. And in that latest data release, about 409 million of that had been allocated. And according to my calculations, it was about 99.5 million that had gone to music alone. So that's about 24% of that 409 million. So it's not, it's not a huge proportion. In terms of the recovery, for the UK, it looks like it will be slowish. There's a report from the Creative Industries Federation that estimates that it will take 3 to 4 years for it to for the UK live music industry to reach 2019 levels of business. This particular graph looks at the global outlook for the industry, and again, as you can see, there's that sharp decline to 2020, and then it gradually goes back up to 2019 levels by about 2022. So it's going to take a while all over the world.
Thank you very much, Ella. That was bleak, but plenty of important information there upon which to build. Nitin, I saw your hand up, and I wondered if you wanted to come back in on any of those points.
Yeah, I mean, they're great points actually, and it's been really interesting hearing what's been said. I'm just to let you know, I'm also the chairman of the PRS Foundation, and we've been talking a lot about all of this, and also I sit on the board of Complicité, which is a well-known theatre company, and the idea of planning is just so difficult because it's, the elephant in the room is we don't know how long this is all going to go on for. I mean, no one can. So the problem is, you can see these huge figures, 1.57 billion. And again, when you see the breakdown of it, it changes, in that you think, oh, well, actually, we don't get as much of that as we'd hoped, or, and it's difficult to plan. But the real problem is trying to figure out how to, because, I mean, agents and theatre companies and venues plan ages in advance. And how do they do that when no one really knows what's going to happen with COVID? So the difficulty is when you have huge sums of money that are being talked about, no one really knows how long they're supposed to last for. So the difficulty is really, when you look at these figures, they don't actually mean much until we have some kind of idea as to what kind of period we're talking about. Is this going to last 2 years? I mean, looking at the graph just then, there's sponsorship coming back in 2021, 2022, and people are making plans for those periods. But then, a short while ago, people were making plans for March next year, and obviously that's changed now. So it's very difficult because we don't know how long we've got to adapt for. We don't know whether this means we have to reskill in different ways. I mean, for example, and I don't mean in some of the stupid ways that the government suggested, like boxing or whatever, but I'm talking more about reskilling.
Everyone got boxing, did they? It was very odd. Everyone should be a boxer. We're going to be a nation of boxers.
I mean, it's like, what the hell? But my point is that you don't know what, to what degree you need to reskill in order to look at how you can use your creative skills that you have currently, and how you can adjust. Like I said, I, for example, learned Final Cut Pro in order to cut together videos that I could put out. And it's difficult because we don't know to what degree we need to change and evolve new skills in order to capitalize on the skills we already have into the future, where we actually see everything as quite nebulous and amorphous and unknown.
Yes, it's extremely difficult to strategize when you don't actually know what you're strategizing for and what kind of world you're strategizing for. And this is, of course, is a microcosm of a global problem, but particularly acute, I think, in this case. I'd like, if I can, to come to Andy Dougherty, who, as well as being the founder of AdLib, which is one of the most important companies providing technical and all sorts of support to festivals, gigs, you name it, and is central to the industry, is also deeply involved in the campaign We Make Events. Andy, hi, and can you, with a view both, selfishly looking at things that Tortoise should be looking at in the months ahead journalistically, but also, what's the road back from where we are now?
Okay. Hi, Matt. Hi, Emma. It has been a long time indeed. Yeah, I think where we're sitting at the minute and what we're looking at with the We Make Events campaign is, at the end of the day, government, they've got a million problems at the moment, whether it be our sector or any other sector. And I think what we're trying to do is, yes, we've got a whole load of problems and a whole load of issues, but we're actually trying to give them the solutions at the same time as well. So part of what we've been doing, a gentleman called Gary White, who is a sort of heavyweight production manager, he's been working very, very closely with a testing company, a UK-based testing company, who actually were the company who did the German-based event that went through about 6 weeks ago, that's hit press here quite recently. And we were doing incredibly well in getting a fully capacity show together in London, about 2,500 capacity for early December. Obviously with the lockdown now, that's changed that a little bit, but regarding how we can get shows back quickly and what the route back is, I honestly believe it's going to be around rapid testing. And some of the way that these organisations can do that now, it is going to be safe. And I do think we, between the health authority, local authorities, the police, the safety advisory groups, everyone's behind all this happening. So when you asked when you sent the little questionnaire out earlier, do you think we'll be back before Easter? I think that there will be very good signs that we'll be back in. Okay, we've got this lockdown now. And in that lockdown now, that doesn't mean to say we're getting shoved back another month, because the answers that we need are still being worked on through this period of time, which is your rapid testing and your vaccines and so on. So the route back, I'd love to see it before April, May. I think if we can start having some stuff happening then, I think the industry is in absolute dire straits if we don't have a summer next year. If we don't get from Glastonbury and festivals through, we're in dire straits. I think one of the key things to coming back, more so than the testing, is the confidence around insurance shows from a promoter's perspective. Yeah. So I think a government-backed insurance scheme against the COVID issue moving forward would be what the industry is looking for at the moment as much as anything else.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'd like, if I may, to come to Louise Simpson, who had a very interesting point in the chat about universal basic income and its relevance to this particular problem, this particular sector. Louise, can you sort of enlighten us and elaborate?
Well, I just think, you know, so many creative people start out as independent people, and as you say, they've all been cut out of the government funding and the sector type funding. These people are individual human beings, and I don't know how you can, how the government would be able to say you are a creative, you are not a creative, therefore you can have UBI. But I just think it's probably the absolute simplest and best way and most creative way of actually giving people a chance to create in this period, because there will be phenomenal creations that come out of this period. And I mean, I really mean it about Grayson Perry. I have no idea I hadn't read his article, but I think what he might well be talking about is these outdated things like the Arts Council, who are already not letting that money go through to the roots. The ground roots is where the art comes from. Individual ground root artists working on their own. They're not parts of big organizations. So I think if UBI came in, the government might accidentally create an artistic force that really is genuinely world beating.
It's very interesting. And I think it's always been a contentious point. This, it came up in the 90s. I remember when with Alan McGee trying to avoid meltdown in welfare reform, so that people who were creatives weren't, effectively forced out of their chosen profession. I wonder if I might come to Steve Barney now. Steve, are you about and available for consultation? Ah, there you are. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Good to see you. Now, Steve, for those who don't know, is one of those performers who's played with just about everyone. He's a drummer and an extraordinary talent, and has, I suspect, more stories than any of us, and will one day write a great memoir. But you are your own business, aren't you, Steve? I mean, you are a self-employed performer.
I am,
so,
yeah.
So the question that I suppose one wants to ask in this context immediately, other than how you're doing, is how are you doing, and is the money getting through to people in your position to the extent that you can carry on doing what you do so well, and do you think it's going to get better or worse?
Well, thanks very much for inviting me, and I appreciate your kind words. I've been predominantly a touring live drummer for the last 25, 26 years. So playing in front of, lots of people, and, being basically in venues and doing sort of, basically doing the thing that we've been banned to do at the moment. So in all honesty, which is the only way I can be, is it's been really challenging on a personal level, just sort of psychologically with the whole thing. But at the same time, I'm hopeful, because I know that people love music and the art and, everything across the board with that. So I know it's going to return. It's just a case of when and how. And I think it's very clever the way people are looking at doing things in slightly different ways, albeit I don't think that although it's good in the short term, I don't think streaming and viewing kind of concerts and things should be the future, even though I know it could be. I guess I'm kind of defensive of that in the long term, selfishly connected to knowing how great it feels, and for people to watch their favorite artists on stage and to be in amongst, all those people. I think as much as the download experience can be great, and we can get money for those particular artists or the people that might be involved in that particular downloadable performance, I think it's a short-term thing. And I guess, being selfish financially, it would be a 1 or 2 day sort of job, if it was me working with an artist. So I know I'm being selfish by saying that, but I guess I'm thinking about everyone if it was a long-term thing. But I'm hopeful, because I know, like I say, I know music is such a huge thing for people, and people love to be entertained, yeah, and this is definitely the biggest audience I've played to since March. So thanks for coming.
Well, we're delighted to help, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with you. I'd like to come to Emma again. Emma, I'm just trying to sort of get my head around the extent to which, if at all, the kind of packages of help and everything are joined up. And I was very struck by something you said earlier about the fact that, in a sense, the fact that the business has been, if not entirely self-sufficient, it hasn't been one that has constantly been in contact with the Quangos and DCMS quite so much. But now it is in jeopardy. It needs help. Are there lines of communication? Is the message getting through to government and to other revenue providers that now is the time? This is in other words, you can, for a relatively small sums of money, things that are in the scheme of things, in terms of the amount of money the government is borrowing, just rounding errors, you can save an entire industry. But is that message getting through?
I think it's getting through to a reasonable extent, and I think organisations like Live, which has come out of the UK Music, which is all of the live industries together, so agents, promoters, production services, festivals, venues, grassroots venues, arenas. We I think realized at the start of the pandemic that we didn't have a good enough route into government specifically for live. And when we were part of the overall music industry, there's so many other issues, with streaming and PRS and all those things, that we went out and we put together a budget, and we employed a lobbying company who I think have done a really good job for us generally. It's never going to be enough, ever. The We Make Events group have done phenomenal things. People like Mark David, who I think is in this conversation, I've seen him on the chat, he runs the Music Venue Trust, which is grassroots venues. He's very well connected. So I think they've listened because, across us and theatre and everything else, the performing arts, we got the money initially. I think that one of the problems we have now is they keep going, we've given you your money, and that money might not be enough. Again, I go back to the furlough. On one of the slides that you showed, I think the furlough money for the employed people that can be furloughed is going to be hugely, hugely important in just keeping jobs. It will help agencies, it will help promoters. It doesn't help everybody, but it will help some people, and that's important. But I think one of the things now we have to discuss with government as well is how, if they don't put things back, we're not going to have the next generation. And that's a real worry. We're seeing new artists of all types, when they can't perform, you're really cutting off more than one limb for them, I think. And that's hugely problematic. You have acts that have maybe just got a record deal, and how do you make them famous without getting them on the road? How do you get any kind of traction for the music that they're making? Because people are, everything's algorithms, and, God, don't ask me how YouTube works, but it tells me about stuff I don't necessarily want to listen to. So I think that's an issue. Can we do more? We always can, but how do you fund getting to those people? The money will run out for the lobbying company that we have at some point, and UK Music will do their bit, and the theatres and all of them will do their bit. It's a hard one. It's a hard one to answer how much more we can do.
And for how much longer.
Yeah.
I'd like to come back to Stuart just to ask sort of some practical questions, really, which is, let us assume that we're looking at social distancing for some time to come, because even if a vaccine arrives early in 2021, it probably won't be available to everyone. So from the point of view of ENO and other venues, what sort of occupancy do you have to be, at least break even? Because one hears different figures, but you know, it's social distancing gets you, I think, to about 30% usually in a venue, and that's, I mean, how does that work, and how do you see that moving forward?
So it's super complicated in that originally the advice was you've got to be at least a metre away from someone else, and there wasn't clarity about where that metre began and ended, and different local councils have different regulations. Westminster City Council eventually said it's from nose to mouth, your nose to someone else's mouth. Well, of course, people lean forward and back when they sit in the seat, or they rest on an armrest, or they might have a massive nose. So we said, actually, it makes a huge difference if it's 80 centimetres, not a metre, and that would move it from about 45% capacity to about 60% capacity, weirdly. Now it needs to be absolutely minimum a metre. So we're in a ludicrous situation where in the Coliseum, biggest theatre in the West End, that does English National Ballet and musicals and comedy and podcasts, a whole bunch of stuff, we had someone sit in each of the 2,349 seats with a metre rule, and someone sit in another one, so long, you know, and they had a kind of moderately sized nose and mouth, and remeasured the whole thing. So our performance on Mozart's Requiem for this weekend, that's recorded this weekend, will have no audience in the auditorium. I think going forward, we have a whole bunch of things we've done to try and make it work. So some opera companies have said we can only break even at 80% capacity. I think that's pretty disingenuous, because in the sentence, the kind of mathematical sentence, you only break even at 80% occupancy if your costs are absolutely massive on stage. If you were to strip down what you've got on stage and not spend $500,000 on a set and have 250 people on stage instead of 500 people on stage, obviously, basic maths, you don't need to break even at 80% occupancy. So I think there was a bit of a stubbornness at first, which was really unhelpful, where the arts said to government, I mean, it's this or nothing. You know, you either massively fund us or we go under. And as someone who's from quite a poor family, and, you know, lots of my mates don't work in the arts, I think initially the mood music from the kind of higher arts, if you like, was pretty gripey. And, you know, it really wasn't helpful. You know, from my conversations with the government, I think the DCMS, as someone said earlier on, I think Emma, was, you know, is it the ugly sister of the government departments, or whatever the phrase was that you used? I think it's a really tricky department because there are so many different types of industries that the DCMS needs to deal with, and so many different pressures, and so many different audiences, that there's not one unified language. One of the first things we set up was a Zoom with 50 chief execs of other arts companies every Friday. So we had one this morning, basically so they could sing happy birthday to me. And, you know, even in that group, it's hard, and it covers the RSC to National Theatre, to the Barbican, to Sheffield Theatres, to the Sage. It covers such a different amount of pressures. It's hard to have one size fits all. One thing I would say about the furlough, I think that I question whether the announcement of the extended furlough was a political kind of manoeuvring thing to placate Conservative MPs who are having a bit of an uprising. And I wouldn't be surprised if the furlough in January either disappears or the contribution from employers needs to be so high that it makes it kind of unworkable. So it's a great thing now. It's a kind of good holding pattern when there's quite a lot of heat in the system. People are very nervous. The election in America is driving people nuts. And it's quite a good kind of catch-all to say, don't worry, we're going to have a furlough till the end of March. I imagine in the new year, the reality will be a bit grimmer than that. That's quite a roundabout way of answering, but it's my birthday privilege. So.
You're entitled to. Thanks very much, Stuart. I'd like to come now to Ciro Romano, who is a very experienced and successful festival organizer, and also I think will be able to tell us how that world has been affected by what's happened. And well, over to you, Ciro. Really, tell us in a nutshell how festivals have been fairly or otherwise treated by the new rescue regime.
Well, I mean, prior to discussing that, I think the first thing is to say that obviously most festivals this year, all festivals this year were cancelled, and many of them had pretty substantial sunk costs, which were not recoverable because nearly everybody wasn't insured. So we started off already in March, losing substantial amounts of money for the year. So it wasn't just we're not making any money this year, it's actual losses that were unrecoverable. So that was really quite a trying time. I think if you go back to March, one of the interesting things was how we were treated compared to similar industries. So let's take restaurants and pubs. Right away, they were given grants, which we weren't. Obviously, the venues were, but promoters, agents, etc., especially the smaller agencies, weren't given any grants. We didn't get any rates holidays, unlike restaurants. So right from the beginning, there was, I think there was a difference in approach to the creative industries compared to pubs and restaurants, which I think is kind of indicative of how the government view us, which you and Emma were alluding to earlier. And I think one of the great examples of it is the Eat Out to Help Out, which the restaurants got. And that was crucial for those guys in those 4 months, in June, July, August, and September. I mean, I'm a shareholder in a restaurant business, and it really saved our year, really. And we didn't really get the equivalent of that, or we didn't get it at all. And maybe if we'd had something like that, then there would have been more socially distant shows if they'd been supported. But at the moment, doing a socially distant show for us is not only a very poor experience for the audience, but unless the artists are taking like a third of their fees and the venues are taking a huge reduction in their fees, it's not even possible to break even. You're going to lose a lot of money, which is why there haven't been that many. And the ones that I know of or have seen have been where there's a kind of, I guess, a relationship between the artists and the venues and the management and the promoters, where everybody's doing it for reduced fees. So I definitely feel that we've been treated in a different way. And on the Cultural Recovery Fund, I mean, personally, obviously, we've got 3 festivals, one of which received some money, but I know many organizations that didn't receive anything who should have received something. And I know many who I won't mention, who I was quite shocked at the levels of money that they were getting. So it feels pretty arbitrary to me how that's been.
Is it a secret, Ciro?
Very good, very good.
Thank you so much, Ciro. I am very sorry to see that the clock has turned to 2, so I'll have to wrap up. Thank you all so much for making this such an interesting and lively first Creative Sensemaker Live. Before I forget, we have a Future Cities Summit coming up on November the 19th. Which we are doing with the Globe and Mail in Toronto. It's going to be an international summit, but one of the sessions on that will be about culture in cities, and one of the guests is Sir Nicholas Heitner of the Bridge Theatre, formerly the National. So please come to that and stay involved in this, in our passion to keep this debate alive. There are so many points I could pick out of today's conversation, but I think there are just a few. One is that Emma made a very good point, which is that not only are the creative industries treated as the poor relation, but because live music has been and music generally has been a success, it's not been there's no default instinct to help it out in times like this, and it is very important that we do so. Andy mentioned the role that vaccines and better test and trace may bring to help us to get back to a live music regime where things are viable. And Stuart too, talking about the necessity of being nimble and organizing both physical venues but also digital services in a way that gets us through to the other side. And as Nitin said, that nimbleness is going to be at the heart of it all, as well as, I think, a stamina actually to not only keep going but also to keep the message alive. And certainly we at Tortoise will be doing our very best to stay at the forefront of this. It's an absolutely crucial campaign. We can't allow the creative industries to fall apart. during this pandemic. It's failure is not an option. So thank you all very much indeed. Please take a look at Creative Sensemaker itself. Send us your recommendations. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks to our superb speakers and contributors, and have a very good afternoon. Thank you all.